In the grim shadow of World War II, the spotlight has often been cast on the horrors of the Holocaust, the brutality of the Japanese invasion, and the devastation of the atomic bombs. But there is one chapter of this global conflict that remains largely neglected: the Indonesian death camps. In the Dutch East Indies, now known as Indonesia, thousands of civilians were forced into internment camps by the Japanese army. These were not prisons or concentration camps in the traditional sense. They were places of extermination, where starvation, disease, and brutal treatment were the everyday reality. Yet these camps are scarcely talked about, their existence overshadowed by the more notorious atrocities of the war. So why does this matter? The Indonesian death camps represent a significant chapter of World War II history that is often overlooked. Understanding this chapter is not only about honoring the victims of these atrocities, but also about recognizing the broader patterns of violence and discrimination that mark this period. This history is critical to understanding the complexities of the war and the lasting impacts it has had on the world. The Indonesian death camps also serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of forgetting. When atrocities are forgotten or ignored, history risks repeating itself. It is an unfortunate truth that the horrors of these camps are not unique to World War II. Similar instances of mass violence have occurred in different parts of the world and continue to happen today. The Indonesian death camps therefore stand as a testament to the sheer brutality of war. They highlight the worst of human capacity for violence and cruelty. By remembering these camps, we not only pay tribute to the victims, but also remind ourselves of the depths to which humanity can sink in times of conflict. In the midst of the Japanese occupation, the Indonesian people suffered immensely. They were forced to endure not only the violence of war, but also the inhumane conditions of the death camps. These camps were a bleak reality for thousands of Indonesians, a punishment for their resistance against Japanese imperialism, a clear violation of human rights that has been largely overlooked by the annals of history. Despite the gravity of these events, the Indonesian death camps remain a largely untold story. They are often overshadowed by the more well-known atrocities of the war, leaving the victims and their suffering largely forgotten. This silence is not only a disservice to the victims, but also to the global understanding of World War II and its multifaceted impacts. Thus, the Indonesian death camps are a stark reminder of the brutal realities of war. They serve as a testament to the lengths to which humanity can go when driven by fear, hatred, and a desire for dominance. It is a story that needs to be told, a truth that must not be forgotten. The story begins in 1942, during the throes of World War II, when the Japanese Empire turned its gaze towards the Dutch East Indies, present-day Indonesia. This vast archipelago, rich in oil, rubber, and other natural resources, was a tempting target for the empire in its quest for regional dominance and economic self-sufficiency. Following the fall of Singapore in February 1942, it took the Japanese a mere month to successfully invade and subjugate the Dutch East Indies. This swift takeover marked the beginning of a brutal 3.5-year occupation, an era of unprecedented hardship and horror for the Indonesian people. In the wake of this conquest, the Japanese established a system of prison camps throughout the Indonesian archipelago. These camps, often located in remote, inhospitable locations, were designed to control, exploit, and intimidate the local population. Men, women, and children, many of them innocent civilians, were forcibly interned in these camps, subjected to harsh labor, starvation, disease, and often physical violence. These were not merely prisons, they were death camps designed to break the spirit and will of those unfortunate enough to find themselves within their walls. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of Indonesians perished in these camps, victims of a ruthless and unrelenting system of oppression. In the camps, the prisoners were subjected to forced labor, often working long hours in grueling conditions. Punishments for perceived infractions were harsh and often fatal. Food was scarce, and disease was rampant, with the lack of medical care exacerbating the crisis. These camps were also sites of brutal psychological torture. The Japanese sought to break the spirit of the Indonesian people, using fear and humiliation as tools of control. The prisoners lived in constant fear, never knowing when the next wave of violence would come or who would be its target. The stories that emerge from these camps are harrowing. They tell of unimaginable suffering, of lives shattered and spirits broken. They tell of a people pushed to the brink of human endurance, living every day in the shadow of death. Yet they also speak of resilience and resistance, of the strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. The Indonesian death camps were a horrifying chapter in the history of World War II, a stark illustration of the depths of inhumanity that war can provoke. Yet they remain largely absent from mainstream historical narratives, their stories untold, their victims forgotten. It is a silence that continues to echo across the decades, a neglect that demands rectification. In the face of such oppressive conditions, the question arises: who were the orchestrators of these horrifying acts? The answer leads us to the governing body of the period, the Imperial Japanese military. The camps were an extension of their brutal and far-reaching occupation of Indonesia, which lasted from 1942 to 1945. The Imperial Japanese military had a rigid hierarchy with General Hitoshi Imamura at the helm during the majority of the occupation. Imamura, a seasoned military leader, was known for his ruthless strategies, which included the establishment and operation of these death camps. The power structure within the camps themselves was equally rigid. Japanese soldiers, often young men barely out of their teens, were placed in charge of the camps. These soldiers were indoctrinated with a militaristic ideology that justified and even encouraged brutal treatment of the Indonesian prisoners. They were taught to view the prisoners not as fellow human beings, but as subordinates to be dominated and controlled. The camp commanders, themselves victims of a brutal military culture, were under immense pressure to maintain order and productivity. To achieve these goals, they resorted to inhumane methods, enforcing a regime of fear and violence. The slightest infraction, real or perceived, could result in severe punishment or death. This oppressive atmosphere was further amplified by the constant threat of starvation and disease. Yet, even within these dire circumstances, the human spirit found ways to resist. Prisoners often banded together, sharing what little they had, and providing mutual support. These informal networks of solidarity offered some semblance of hope and served as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The Indonesian death camps were not just sites of physical torment, but were also battlegrounds of psychological warfare. The Japanese authorities used these camps as tools to suppress the Indonesian spirit, aiming to break their will and quash any potential resistance. However, the stories of resilience and resistance that emerged from these camps show that they did not succeed entirely. This dark period of history serves as a reminder of the depths of human cruelty, but also highlights the resilience of the human spirit. The story of the Indonesian death camps is a testament to the power of resistance, even in the face of extreme adversity. The atrocities committed within these camps and the systems that allowed them to occur remain a critical part of our shared history that must not be forgotten. The rampant abuse and exploitation weren't limited to physical torture alone. The camps also implemented a system of forced labor. Indonesian prisoners were expected to contribute to the Japanese war effort, often working under grueling conditions with minimal sustenance. They were put to work in fields, mines, and factories, producing resources for the Japanese military machine. The workload was beyond human limits, and coupled with scarce food and poor living conditions, death due to exhaustion was common. Women suffered a distinctly cruel fate, often coerced into serving as comfort women for the Japanese soldiers. These women were forced into sexual slavery and subjected to daily assaults and humiliation. The exact number of women forced into this horrific role remains unknown. However, it is evident that the system was widespread and indicative of the disregard for human dignity and rights prevalent within the camps. Children were not spared from the horrors either. Many were separated from their families, forced into labor, or subjected to brutal indoctrination efforts. The Japanese sought to reshape their identities, eradicating their cultural roots and imposing Japanese language and customs upon them. The scars left by this cultural genocide took generations to heal, with some effects persisting even today. The death toll within these camps is difficult to ascertain with precision. Records were either poorly kept or deliberately destroyed, and many deaths went unreported. However, conservative estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of Indonesians perished within the camps, with some figures rising into the millions. This devastating loss of life showcases the scale and intensity of the suffering inflicted upon the Indonesian people. Yet, despite the grim circumstances, the Indonesian prisoners held on to their identity and culture, often in subtle acts of defiance. They would secretly teach their children the Indonesian language and customs, or covertly practice their religious rituals. These acts of resistance offered a glimmer of hope amidst the suffering and served as a silent protest against their oppressors. While the physical infrastructure of the camps has largely disappeared, the memories of those who survived remain, a testament to their resilience and courage. Their stories paint a vivid picture of the atrocities committed, providing a chilling reminder of the inhumanity that can arise during times of conflict. Even in the face of such horrifying adversity, the spirit of resistance persisted, demonstrating the indomitable strength of the human spirit. As the war progressed, so did the severity of the atrocities committed in the death camps of Indonesia. With resources diverted to the war effort, food and medical supplies became increasingly scarce. Starvation and disease became rampant, with prisoners receiving meager rations that were barely enough to sustain life. This scarcity was not a result of circumstance, but a calculated tactic of war, used to weaken and demoralize the prisoners. The prisoners were subjected to grueling labor, often working long hours in harsh conditions. They were made to construct railways, roads, and airfields to support the Japanese war effort, often with little to no regard for their physical well-being. The toll of this hard labor, combined with inadequate nutrition and medical care, led to countless deaths. Torture was a common form of punishment within the camps. Prisoners were beaten, whipped, and subjected to water torture. Some were forced to watch as their fellow prisoners were executed, a horrifying spectacle intended to instill fear and maintain control. The brutality of these punishments was not just physical, but psychological, designed to break the spirit of the prisoners. Meanwhile, the Japanese propaganda machine worked tirelessly to suppress the reality of the camps. They painted a picture of harmonious coexistence and mutual cooperation between the Japanese and the Indonesians, a gross distortion of the truth. This misinformation served to mask the horrors of the camps from the outside world, allowing the atrocities to continue unchecked. Despite the systematic oppression, the Indonesian prisoners found ways to resist their oppressors. They smuggled food and medicine into the camps, organized secret prayer meetings, and even plotted escapes. These acts of defiance, though small in scale, served as a testament to their resilience and determination to survive. The death camps of Indonesia were not just centers of physical torture and death, but also of cultural and psychological warfare. They were designed to break the spirit of the Indonesian people, to erase their identity and subjugate them to the will of their oppressors. Yet, even in the face of such horrifying adversity, the Indonesian people clung to their identity, their culture, and their indomitable spirit. Their resilience in the face of such unimaginable horrors is a testament to the strength of the human spirit, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. Despite the considerable resistance demonstrated by the Indonesian prisoners within the camps, silence echoed outside. The world remained largely oblivious to the atrocities unfolding within the Indonesian archipelago. A chilling complacency, fueled by a combination of ignorance, distance, and the fog of war, allowed these death camps to operate with impunity. Yet the silence was not complete. There were whispers, rumors, fragments of truth that managed to seep through the rigid Japanese propaganda machine. These snippets of information found their way to the Allied forces, the Dutch government in exile, and the Indonesian underground resistance movements. These entities, however, were grappling with their own challenges. The Allied forces were engaged in a brutal, all-encompassing global conflict. The Dutch government, exiled in London, was desperate to regain control of its former colony, while the Indonesian resistance movements were fragmented and lacked the resources to mount a significant challenge to the Japanese occupation. Despite these constraints, efforts were made to investigate and substantiate the rumors of the death camps. Covert operatives risked their lives to gather information, while brave individuals within the camps risked everything to smuggle out letters and messages, hoping to draw attention to their plight. Yet the complexity of the war, the remoteness of the camps, and the stranglehold of Japanese propaganda created a veil of silence that shrouded the true extent of the horrors. The world's understanding remained fragmented, incomplete. The full scope of the atrocities would only become apparent after the war, when survivors began to share their stories and historians began to piece together the jigsaw puzzle of evidence. This silence, this lack of global awareness and intervention, is a damning indictment of the world's response to the death camps. It underscores the profound vulnerability of marginalized populations during times of war and conflict, and the ease with which powerful entities can manipulate narratives to mask atrocities. Yet the silence also amplifies the importance of the resistance within the camps, the essential role of those who risk their lives to resist the oppressors, to smuggle out information, to keep hope alive amidst the horrors. It highlights the critical importance of bearing witness, of speaking out against atrocities, and of breaking the silence that too often shrouds the darkest chapters of our history. In the midst of this grim scenario, there were instances of extraordinary resilience, courage, and humanity. Prisoners in the camps, stripped of dignity and freedom, found ways to resist their oppressors. They risked severe punishment and death to maintain a semblance of humanity, to document their experiences, and to keep hope alive. These acts of defiance and resilience were not grand gestures, but small, everyday acts of resistance. One such example was the clandestine network of communication established by the prisoners. In the face of strict censorship and surveillance, they developed a complex system of secret codes and signals. Messages were smuggled out of the camps in numerous ingenious ways, hidden in clothing, concealed in food parcels, or even written in invisible ink made from plant extracts. Some prisoners also managed to keep hidden diaries and logs, documenting the daily life and atrocities in the camps. These accounts, often written in tiny handwriting on scraps of paper or cloth, were hidden away in various places, sewn into clothing, buried in the ground, or concealed in the walls of the huts. The risk was immense, for discovery meant certain death. Yet, they persevered, driven by the need to bear witness to their suffering and the atrocities committed by their captors. Music and art also became a form of resistance. Despite the harsh conditions and lack of materials, prisoners composed songs, recited poetry, and made rudimentary drawings and sculptures. These creative expressions served multiple purposes. They provided a means of escape, a way to preserve cultural identity, and a method to document their experiences. In the face of unimaginable horror, these acts of resistance were a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human will. They were acts of defiance against the dehumanization, a way of affirming their identity and humanity amidst the systematic attempts to erase them. Yet these acts of resistance were not just about survival. They were also about bearing witness to the atrocities, about ensuring that the world would one day know the truth. It was a desperate plea for justice and accountability, a refusal to let their suffering be erased or forgotten. In the end, these acts of defiance and resilience serve as a powerful reminder of our capacity for courage and resistance in the face of oppression and inhumanity. They underscore the power of bearing witness, of speaking truth to power, and of the human spirit's indomitable will to survive and resist. The aftermath of these horrifying events was as complex as the tragedies themselves. Once the camps were eventually exposed and the world was made aware of the atrocities committed, there was a collective gasp of shock and horror. It was one thing to hear about the brutalities, but quite another to see the evidence, to witness firsthand the extent of the human cruelty and depravity that had been allowed to occur unchecked. Yet, the question remained, what could be done in the face of such overwhelming evidence of systematic state-sponsored genocide? In the wake of the revelations, there was a clamor for justice. Survivors and their families, human rights groups, and international organizations called for the prosecution of those responsible for the atrocities. They demanded that the individuals who had orchestrated and implemented the horrific policies be held accountable for their actions. However, the path to justice was fraught with obstacles. Many of the individuals responsible for the atrocities were in positions of power and influence, protected by the same system that had allowed the genocide to occur in the first place. Moreover, the Indonesian government, in a desperate bid to control the narrative and protect its image, engaged in a campaign of denial and obfuscation. They downplayed the extent of the atrocities, disputed the evidence, and attempted to shift the blame onto the victims themselves. Despite these barriers, efforts were made to bring those responsible to justice. International tribunals were established, investigations were launched, and survivors were given a platform to share their stories. Yet the process was slow and fraught with setbacks. Many of the perpetrators were never brought to trial, and many of the survivors died without seeing justice served. Nevertheless, the survivors' stories, the secret messages and diaries, the songs and artwork served a crucial role in this fight for justice. They provided incontrovertible evidence of the atrocities committed, forcing the world to confront the brutal reality of what had occurred. They served as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder of our capacity for resistance in the face of inhumanity. The struggle for justice in the wake of the Indonesian death camps was a long and arduous journey, marked by setbacks and disappointments. Yet it was a journey that was necessary, not only for the survivors and their families, but for the world at large. The revelations about the camps served as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty, but also of our capacity for resilience, resistance, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Even though the international response to the atrocities committed was not as swift or as decisive as one might have hoped, the legacy of the Indonesian death camps has had profound implications on both a national and global scale. On a national level, the revelations about the camps sparked deep and lasting changes within Indonesia itself. The public discourse began to shift, with many Indonesians questioning the actions of their government and demanding accountability. This led to significant political and social upheaval, with widespread protests and calls for reform. Over time, these pressures resulted in substantial changes to the political landscape, with a gradual move towards greater transparency, accountability, and respect for human rights. However, the legacy of the death camps is not confined to Indonesia alone. Globally, the revelations served as a harsh reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the potential for systemic abuse and violations of human rights. The images and stories that emerged from the camps galvanized the international community, leading to renewed commitments to human rights protections and the prevention of genocide. The UN, for example, strengthened its mechanisms for monitoring and responding to situations of mass atrocities. Many countries also began to reconsider their own policies and practices, seeking ways to prevent such horrors from recurring. In addition, the stories of the survivors and their unyielding quest for justice have had a profound impact on the collective consciousness. They have served as a stark reminder of the power of human resilience, the importance of bearing witness, and the need to stand up against injustice, regardless of the odds. This legacy, though born of unimaginable suffering and loss, has had a transformative effect, prompting a global re-evaluation of our collective responsibilities towards one another. The death camps of Indonesia, while largely forgotten, have nevertheless left an indelible mark on history, a mark that continues to shape our understanding of human rights and justice to this day. As we delve into the final segment, we'll explore the ongoing efforts to ensure that the stories of the survivors are not forgotten, and that the lessons learned from this dark chapter of history continue to inform our actions in the present. The persistent echoes of the death camps continue to reverberate through the decades, posing questions that remain largely unanswered. The voices of the survivors, their stories etched in pain and resilience, are a constant reminder of the atrocities committed, but many aspects of this dark chapter remain shrouded in mystery. Why were the camps allowed to exist for so long without international intervention? How deep did the roots of complicity run within the Indonesian government and society? How many lives were truly lost within those grim perimeters? These questions, as unsettling as they might be, are integral to our understanding of the past and our navigation of the present. They compel us to confront the uncomfortable realities of power, complicity, and indifference, and to reassess our own roles within these dynamics. It is only by grappling with these difficult questions can we hope to prevent such horrors from repeating themselves. The pursuit of justice for the victims and survivors of the camps remains an ongoing struggle. The path towards accountability is fraught with obstacles, ranging from political resistance and bureaucratic inertia to the simple devastating passage of time. Yet despite these challenges, the survivors and their advocates remain undeterred, their resolve a testament to the human capacity for resilience in the face of adversity. Their stories, powerful and harrowing, continue to reverberate, demanding not just to be heard, but to be acted upon. The echoes of their voices serve as a call to action, challenging us to confront our own complacencies, to question our own complicity, and to strive for a world where such atrocities are relegated to the annals of history, never to be repeated. The death camps of Indonesia, a grim testament to the darkest corners of human capability, have left an indelible stain on our collective conscience. Yet they also serve as a stark reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring quest for justice, and the transformative power of truth. The memory of the camps, and the lessons they embody, must not be allowed to fade into obscurity. The echoes of the past must continue to inform our actions in the present, guiding us towards a future where rights are respected, justice is pursued, and such atrocities are consigned to the history books, never to be repeated. The death camps of Indonesia, a haunting specter from the past, serve as a stark reminder of the cost of silence and the price of indifference. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that their stories continue to be told, their lessons continue to be learned, and their legacy continues to inspire action, not just for the victims and survivors of Indonesia, but for all those who suffer under the weight of oppression and injustice, wherever they may be. Thanks for listening. This has been the Dark History Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts, and if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.